it? That was the end of the story?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any of them. Oh, I'll be watching Stu. Every breath you take, every move you make. I'll be watching Stu. I kind of spaced out. Not even drunk. This is weird.
Would you say it's weird or is it a little strange?
Boo!
And welcome to the Downer Fun Podcast. How's it going, losers? Woo!
Yeah!
Yay! We are excited. We are pumped. I am here with a few of my best friends. But before we do that, we are the Downer Fun Podcast. I'm your host, Warren. And here, what we do is normally review some movies, some TV shows, maybe some games, talk about some butts, like nothing crazy, the typical Saturday or Monday night stuff. And we're going to have some fun. And tonight, I'm super pumped because I have been waiting a long time to talk about this show with you guys. It's Stranger Things 2 on Netflix. And I'm super excited. But before we do that, before we get into all that, we have to set some ground rules. Let's talk about some stuff. Rylan, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going tonight?
Good. I miss your face. Mouth of the South. Mr. Bryland, and what you sipping on and what you been watching?
I'm sipping on some cool, refreshing H2O in my Enzo Amore WWE glass, as usual.
You're showing it up. It's not a visual podcast, but still.
If anybody could see this, it was a WWE glass with a microphone on it that has like a fuzzy handle.
A cup
of water. And what I've been watching recently is I watched SmackDown for the first time in like probably a month because SmackDown has been WWE SmackDown has been kind of meh recently. But this past weekend was awesome because they actually put the belt on a wrestler that's really good instead of Jinder Mahal, who's making the belt feel just undeserved and antiquated. They put it on AJ Styles, so it sets up an amazing match against AJ Styles and Brock Lesnar for the pay-per-view. It's going to be amazing.
Nice. Yeah, I don't watch wrestling, so I'm not sure who those people are, but
I haven't watched it in a while, but that's kind of exciting. Jinder Mahal has been a very dry, annoying champion.
Yeah. So, and AJ Styles is probably the best wrestler in WWE, period.
Oh, I mean, with a name like AJ Styles, he has to be.
Sure, but he's also like 1/10 the size of Brock Lesnar, so that'll be an interesting match.
It will be an interesting match.
Well, all right. Well, as always, I'm excited for your wisdom, and I'm also excited for your beautiful face. So thank you for hanging out, as always, tonight. I want to toss it over to the man who needs no introduction, yet we still will give him one, the Shredder, Mikhail Bluito. How's it going?
That is my name in American.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I've been speaking Portuguese the whole time. What's up?
That's real. So far. What have you been sipping on and what are you watching?
Yeah, so right now I'm sipping on the same drink as Browland, although out of a different glass, because we are not in the same room together. Ha ha ha. And it's water. It's water, fun fact. What I've been watching, well, I don't have the ability to like binge or like watch multiple things really at once. So realistically, I watched Ragnarok and then I started watching Stranger Things, and that's about all the time I had this week. So nothing. Cool.
All right. Well, as always, it's great to see your face. Hopefully that we can also kind of link up so we can actually see your face in person. But, won't hold my breath. I'm with, again, the beautiful host of the highly successful Fear Boners. Andrew Abbott, how's it going, man?
That's me. It's going well. I enjoy sharing my boners with people.
Thank you.
And I think, I'm here with Warren. We're sitting together in the same room, not drinking out of the same glass. But
yes.
We are romantically splitting a bottle of wine.
Yes, we are.
It's a nice red. I'm drinking it out of my mason jar mug from Dick's Last Resort, mostly just because it says Dick's on it, to up the romantic nature of this rendezvous. But yeah, I was telling Warren I got into watching a little bit more anime, so I've been watched a little bit of this and that. I finally got around to finishing Naruto, which took me like forever, which is not really an accomplishment, but glad I got it out of the way. And then besides that, we've just been watching Simpsons for the last couple hours to brush up for the upcoming Simpsons trivia that's happening in Somerville next week. I'm going to be out of town for it, but I hope my team demolishes everybody else. And yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Go Team Abbott.
What's the team name?
We always have a different name because the teams that always keep their names are the ones that always win, and we never win.
That's just a sad story, isn't it?
Warren, can you smell the fear of the fear burners being that close to Abbott?
Every day.
That's just because I don't wash my jeans regularly.
I was going to say, that's indicative of something else.
Thank you, as always. I'm super pumped to have you on as well. You've been on a streak, you've been on a roll, as they call it.
A skid mark?
Yes, there you go. So, I appreciate you coming on. And I am Warren, I am your host, and I am also sharing this beautiful bottle of whatever buck chuck. It's like $5 now. Like, it's supposed to be $2, but whatever. But it's a nice little cab salve from Trader Joe's, so thank you so much for Trader Joe's.
I didn't realize it's called Chuck because the guy, it's Charles.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's not the guttural sound you make after you're drinking it.
Yeah, I thought it was that, or you just like chuck when you're done drinking it.
It's not too bad. I mean, it's definitely not too bad. But I think very smooth wine. I mean, it's something we definitely had before. It's literally $3 sometimes, maybe $4 or $5 depending on where you are. Maybe $2 depending on where you are. So I would say it's like definitely a wine that you can't go too wrong. Or it probably is a great wine that you can make mulled wine out of. And it's definitely coming up to the holidays times for that. So definitely kind of keep an eye out for that. And for me, I've actually been on the same sort of train. I've watched a couple things here and there. Nothing new. I need to start Mindhunter, and I need to start these other shows that's on Netflix. It just hasn't had the chance to actually start it. But did actually get super excited. It was like one of those moments that you turn the channel right to HBO and this movie's starting. And you're like, oh, I don't know what movie this is. And then I love me some Leonardo DiCaprio. And I love Tom Hanks. And they're both in Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
And this movie's great. This movie is absolutely great. So I got a chance to kind of watch that. I just literally sat there and rewatched it. It's like in the middle of the day. So it was just a great watch. It's very fun. Lots of people are in that movie. Lots of cameos.
We should have them both on the podcast.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this official invitation, Leo, Tom. I mean, Tom, you're running for president. So, I mean, this is going to only help you. Definitely, we would love to have you on the show. We'll review some of your movies that you won Oscars for or not. It's okay. And I'm super pumped about that. So,
Joker the Volcano review coming up.
there you go.
Bachelor party review.
Oh God.
I'm not gonna spoil Catch Me If You Can, although that movie is over, like 10 years old.
Does he
It's a
get
great movie.
good?
I mean, it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
Loosely based on a true story, I'm assuming.
I mean, aren't we all loosely based on a true story?
I like that.
Also, spoiler alert, I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, this is the perfect time for me to not spoil this movie. But it's definitely a great film. I think it really kind of just ties into it. It's a very fun sort of adventure, sort of mystery almost too, and it's very interesting how this guy or this kid ends up kind of just doing the things that he does. So I would definitely suggest it. Probably one of my top movies that have both of them in it. Is that the only movie that both of them are in? Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Unless he was in Saving Private Ryan as an extra.
No.
Yeah. So that's what I've been watching. Yeah. Just kind of hanging out. I'm super pumped to really kind of talk a lot about Stranger Things with our entire cast that we had from last year. Now we actually come in from this year. We were super pumped. It dropped out sometime in August, and a lot of people have been talking about, should we binge it? Should we try to give it some time to breathe? We're not entirely sure, but I'm kind of pumped, and I'm super pumped to kind of talk about this actual show. It's only 9 episodes, and so we actually get one more than we actually got last year. So it was actually pretty interesting. I was super pumped about that. I didn't know how many episodes it was until it ended, and I was like, oh, well, all right. I finished this all in one night, so I was super pumped about that. Then I rewatched it again throughout this past week, and so that was fun. But before we get into talking about Stranger Things, we want to give you guys a small, quick break because if you haven't seen it, we will be spoiling everything about Stranger Things Season 1 and Season 2. We don't know what else is going to happen after this, but I would definitely suggest pausing the show. We're going to give you a moment to take a breather, go binge it. It takes about like maybe 4, 5, 8, 10 hours. And then come on back, and then we will pick up where we left off. So we will see you soon for our entire review, spoilers and all, of Stranger Things Part 2.
Hawkins steamer.
Hello. And we are back, and thank you so much for our brief intermission. We're coming back to you. We are talking about Stranger Things 2 on Netflix, and I'm pumped. I'm going to toss it over and give it the reins down in Africa to Bryland and say, Bryland, tell me some things that you actually really liked and some wins that you have for Stranger Things 2. The entire series.
Yeah, so this season, like season 1 was all about this group of kids and how they came together to confront these supernatural events happening in their town. And it was really, and you had some really interesting side characters like Steve and John, these older kids that were in the periphery. But it was really cool to see someone like Steve come out front and actually kind of steal the season 2 away from everybody else, especially when he teamed up with Dustin. That's like one of the best bromances I've seen in TV this season. When Steve grabs his bat that has all the nails on it, just reminded me of like kind of like this is like a teenage version of Evil Dead.
Yeah.
They're about to walk around and just like kick some ass, or it even reminded me of like movies like Monster Squad or The Goonies. Just seeing Steve and Dustin team up, I could see like a whole side season or side series starring them and just their wacky hijinks, but also like teenager to adolescent mentorship. I also liked how Will got more screen time this time. I think he actually created probably the best anti-smoking campaign when the big smoke monster was driving into his face. That was nuts. That actually carried over for 2 episodes, and it was just like keeps on coming, and he's just freaking out over that. And granted, you should freak out over that, absolutely. But he had some really cool moments, like the whole idea of the spy among them was really neat. That even though he was still acting like they're on their side, when the mind flayer is actually inside of him, he's saying like he can hear and stuff. So he's like kind of trying to protect his friends, but also is interesting to see like, hey, he's also the one trying to fuck up their plans to take out the mind flayer as well. It was really cool to see Sean Astin as Bob. Bob was really cool. Nice new character. To see a new love interest for Winona Ryder's character. And it was really cool because he's like definitely a foil to Harper. He's not the tough machismo guy. He's the nerd. He's the Radio Shack nerd that like probably puts circuit boards together and grew up doing that. And he like was probably like Dustin or one of these kids. Like even started the Hawkins High School AV Club, which they all belong to.
Yeah.
Which was really neat. And he was probably in that high school, like seeing Winona Ryder's character from afar and just like idolizing her and just like obsessing over her in high school the whole time. And he finally got to be with her, which was really cool.
Yeah, I really like that scene because it also alluded to the fact that it seems as though like Hopper and Joyce Byers, Winona Ryder's character, it looked like they probably had made fun of him like while they were still in school. And they were definitely alluding to the fact that they knew each other. And I guess nobody leaves
Hawkins,
thank you. So nobody leaves Hawkins. But they definitely were alluding to some things I thought was also pretty cool, like some kind of undertones, some jokes, and like how they were like sharing cigarettes and like skipping like certain periods of class and things like that. And I just like the fact that he just, much like you were talking about, Bradley, he gave a huge different sort of dynamic, like a supporting dynamic that we really arguably we didn't see at all in the first season. And this second season, he's the only person that's a father character that seems to care, like a role model. So we could talk about him and Hopper and their differences between how they chose to be that parent, like be that role model, be that figure. But it was just great to see that, he just embraced it. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was interesting because season 1, Hopper is like he's an adult superhero. He's the one that will save the kids in the end. Not really a role model per se, but he's there to help them out. And it's cool to see like Bob's like, you know what? Well, I'm gonna here to like help you actually guide you the way and stuff. And then I thought the school dance was a perfect way to end the season. And it definitely showed you, like, kind of set up, like, what's going to happen next? You got all these new relationships, like Mike and Eleven finally getting together, Dustin trying to be the player he can be, and Lucas and Max. That was a really nice, touching moment that, hey, you got some couples going on here. How are these relationships going to affect the dungeon party going forward?
Yeah.
And I would say, like, probably my favorite episode out of the season was, like, the one that actually went off another direction, which was the Lost Sister, where the Chicago episode. It was interesting to kind of, like, explore the background of, like, where Eleven came from, more about, like, her mother and her past, and the revelation that her dad is still alive somewhere, that he did not become Demogorgon Chow in the first season.
I thought it was.
That'll be interesting
vision.
to see how to pull him back into it.
I thought that was a vision that, like, she just said it to get her to unlock that power.
No, that when they were about to kill one of the scientists that worked at the Hawkins plant, he actually said, like, hey, he's alive. So he gave up that information on him.
Yeah, I wonder, because that's probably a question that I still have, was he telling the truth or not? Because we actually didn't see, we actually didn't see Papa. We didn't see his character die. We assumed that he died, and we were told by the actual sort of characters in the show that he was dead. But he was pretty adamant to the fact that he wasn't dead. So I'm wondering if there's like another element, like a deeper layer that we're going to get into this later on.
Yeah. And, I mean, the whole idea behind that episode, like, meeting 8 and how her powers differ from 11's and how they can work together to create chaos but also help a lot. It was, I think it's just, like, it was a journey that only 11 could take. The other kids couldn't take this journey just because of her background. It needed to be something kind of dangerous that she actually explored and went into by herself for her to understand, all right, I do not want to become this person that lets my emotions control me to act out in rage, like how she pulled Max's skateboard out from underneath her. And I think it started making her think about, like, what does it really matter to have friends, and what does family mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point too. They even kind of call out. I really liked the part in which she went to go see Mama, and they really tied it directly back to season 1 when Will is like using the lights to signal how to communicate, and we see that exactly what's happening here. And then we also kind of figure out what's actually going on with her mother and how she was electroshock therapy, I think it's called, or how she was basically torturing, and That was kind of a tough moment, but I liked how they actually kind of talked about this really is happening to her. Like, she's living this kind of repetitious sort of dream this entire time, which is very, very challenging. Very,
when you find out what the babble she's saying means, it puts together the story. Yeah. Oh, that part's just
that was really good.
I just like that we know that these characters aren't new, right? We've been introduced to these characters last season, and now we're coming back and we find more information, and then we start to explore exactly see what's happening with both of these characters. I think it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Brian, a couple things. I wish that they showed more of an insight that there was more of them out there. Like even just teased it a little.
Maybe another one that they could show.
I mean, just like not even show, but just like give a reason why 8 was the one that she chose to help her out. The other thing was, I thought it was very interesting that you raised the point where like 11 needed to go down that spiritual journey where that was the extra episode. Like they had an 8-episode show and then they wrote one more that was just 11. So I thought that was kind of interesting where they, she was the only one that's gotten a solo episode, for example. But at the end, when she's closing that huge hole, she still goes back to rage. In fact, she uses the lessons that 8 told her. Which is, one of the things, like, you can't watch a show like this and not think of the Dagobah scenes in Empire. Like when she's trying to pull all I could see was, the X-Wing's too big, it's impossible. And especially with the lesson of, like, in this case, it was draw from your hatred, draw from your sadness, and then it will make you more powerful. I really thought they were going to have, like, a redeeming moment and, quote-unquote, have her go to the light side and think of the happy moments with Hopper and with Mike and trying to find Will. And that would be, like, the true source of, like, a next step up. Which they didn't do, and I don't know how I feel with that. Because it still indicates she's like this rage-filled monster, but it also wasn't cliche.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I worry about Mike. I mean, if he breaks her heart, I mean, he's dead.
I mean, that's a great call out, Mike, because I also was thinking about, are they going to keep following a lot of the different sci-fi sort of tendencies, tropes that you want? Because we've seen that, like you said, we've seen that in Star Wars. We've seen it even more recently in The Force Awakens, where instead of, Rey's following her anger, she's following the sense of calm, and that's how she actually becomes more powerful and try to start figuring things out.
You see an X-Men First Class.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's actually a better sort of, I mean, I like that movie. That was a good movie. But that's a better sort of depiction of it, too, because that's when he becomes, like, really calm. And starts having like more, like just way more powerful. But there's nothing in this show. I mean, like these kids, these women to their mothers, they were like drug induced and just had tons of different testing. It's, just because she has to draw from the hatred, and that's okay to have that there, doesn't mean that she's a bad person. She's just going from the ammo and the fuel that is her past and her history. And it's also something interesting to think about it of, well, she's still living with that, and that's still something who she is. That's her identity, but it doesn't really sort of define her. And I like the fact that she can draw from it, but that doesn't like consume her so far. So I would hope that it stays maybe not so negative, but you really have to tap into that one, because season 3, that's what we can actually kind of go even more towards, especially if the Papa character is still alive. Then we can see exactly what her powers can actually do, from the fact that instead of using one hand, she uses 2. Both her nose starts bleeding, she starts floating in the air. Who knows what she can actually do at that point?
She is
super bleed powers.
Yeah. I did like she had a little bit more diverse power set than 8. Like she is clearly the logical next step. And so, like, 8 could only make people see things, but 11 had the telekinetic ability. She also had, she was like a fully fledged out psychic Pokemon, whereas, like, 8 could only use, some stupid Mr. Mime trick. So
8 is Mew and 11's Mewtwo.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm thinking more like they clearly were trying to build them for different reasons, and 8 kind of got like mirror move, whereas 11 got confusion, and she got like the weird sonar thing where she could find anyone in the dark. It would make it interesting, and I was reading this beforehand that they apparently want to do 4 chapters and then they're done. So it'll make it interesting to see if there's a 13 or 14 or 30, and see if there's someone who they learned from 11's failures to try and make this one superhuman, and see how 11 fares against the better. Which I'm actually glad that they haven't done a mutant on mutant fight yet. Just, I've seen too many terrible X-Men movies to like.
It's gonna Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman's gonna be like 12. Jacked.
He's gonna wear a blonde wig.
He just decided not to make them like puny little children. We decided to make our psychopaths giant jacked Australian men.
Only if he sings it in the same accent as from Les Mis.
That's a great one.
But yeah, if I was worried in the junkyard scene when they're training that her sister was gonna piggyback her and she was gonna start running around and flipping through the junk heaps and stuff, and it was gonna be like full on Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, especially because
I had no idea where you were. I had no idea where you were going with that. I was like, "What the fuck is he?" Oh, right.
Well, I'm just taking everybody's points in and then punctuating them. Also, the saddest point in the entire series was, in fact, actually, when we find out that Bob works at Radio Shack.
Yeah.
And he wants to have a career at Radio Shack. He might have been able to squeeze out maybe 10 or 12 good more years out of that company, but then it ate shit. So he would have been shit out of luck.
No, I mean, Radio Shack in the 80s was a totally different thing than Radio Shack now. I mean, first of all, it existed. Secondly, they had a lot of stuff for the hobbyist in mind. So you could go in there and buy like individual transistors and individual like diodes and stuff and go home and build like your own FM radio if you wanted to. Yeah, it sounds corny when we have all supercomputers in our pockets, but hey, that was a thing back then.
But what about Bob post Radio Shack? What would Bob have done post Radio Shack?
Apparently
He would probably be CEO of a Kickstarter project.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if he was fluent in like BASIC, get a job being a developer somewhere. The dude had, clearly had skills.
Bob the Basic.
Basic Bob.
Aw. Brylan, what else you got?
Those are my wins.
Cool. Well, I'm going to toss it over to Blewett. How's your boy?
Hello. So, I thought a couple things.
What?
First of all, let's hear it for the greatest douchebag on television, Steve. I really liked him from the first season, like so much that I thought it was one of the best things in the world that he went away with the chick in the end, because that never happens. Usually it's like the weird guy. And I actually actively rooted against Nancy and Jonathan getting together, because I was like, what about my boy Steve? Again, like he took that 80s douchebag prototype and made it somehow relatable and likable. And the kid killed it, from the writing to the acting all the way down.
To the hair.
Yeah. A couple things, like more on the technical side of things. The editing was unbelievably quick. Like the jump cuts from scene to scene were like very kind of abrupt and like startling in some places, but to me it really worked when they would like hard cut from one place to another, and you kind of see how the story combined. Now, I'm gonna say stuff not so good about the parts that they were actually cutting to, but I thought the editing and the pacing was fast, but it still maintained some sense of cohesion. I liked the self-referentialness of this, where they actually made fun of the dad being useless and the romance movie from the mom. Like, she pokes her head up and has the romance novel, book, and then she, like, literally walks out and steps into, this romance novel. Biggest win for me, though, is another technical feat. I thought that the lighting in this was unbelievable. Like, there was just the color palette they pulled off and ranged from, like, natural, the natural kind of world when they're out and about in the forest. Like, it looked like any Midwestern forest or farm or whatever. Going straight on down through when they were almost, they were in the elevator going down to the Upside Down with that huge rift. And pretty much the entire thing was either rendered CGI or a very good matte painting in the background. And like, they really just spanned that bridge in between. Specifically, like, color palette was amazing. It was so diverse. One other thing, I think that the shadow work they did, the way that they would draw your eye from one place to another by illuminating some and then backing off others. Like, I said this probably, maybe, but when Eleven's doing the echolocation thing, it basically looks like an iPhone's portrait. The new iPhone has the portrait mode, which is probably a reference for like 6 of our listeners. But so where they do where only the subject is with light and everything else is black, and I thought that was really cool. They took that to an extreme this season, and like every scene had that, where there was just holes missing from pretty much every set piece. The other thing is, I loved, goes out to Evil Dead when all the lights were freaking out, and you just see the cabin alone in the woods with like the little slits of light coming through the panels and just like fading in and out. I love that sort of junk. Yeah, that to me was my biggest win. Not really like the most glamorous thing in the world, but I had some issues with other, like, the big things that a lot of people talk about. So for me, honestly, the main draw was just seeing what sort of visual level they could take it next. One last little win. Lucas's sister, every single word that girl said was absolutely freaking hilarious. Yeah. Like, she was like the perfect, this is a show, and it's just, I think this goes to what this show really does well, is that this show in essence is just an homage. It's just two people that love 80s movies and 80s literature just trying to make the best product that they could. It looks like an updated movie of any of those films released in that era. And Lucas's sister is just that annoying little sibling. We got to relate to the 4 main ones. So that means Jonathan and Nancy. Like, you can't feel annoyed by the main characters when they're dealing with them two. But to go younger and then still pull off the annoying sibling, loved it. Those are the big things for me.
Yeah, even kind of talking from that, like, I think one of the biggest things from the introduction to that character was the fact that we actually got other families in here. And I was super surprised, even in the entire first season, of where's Lucas' family? Like, where's Dustin's family? I wanted to know, like, at least someone from that. Like, there was a bit too much focus, I think, on Mike family and Will Byers' family. And so, right out the gate, I think the first scene, we see Dustin's mom and how she's, like, super, like, lovey. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, we actually get a chance to expand this universe just a little bit because we know that these characters exist. And we know that they're there, so at least there should be something that you want to kind of give them. And the entire scene when Luke is talking to his father of, how can you tell a girl that you're wrong? Or, what if she's wrong? That entire scene is like freaking gold because it was just great. Yeah, it was so good.
What do you say to Mom when she's wrong? She's like, well, she's not.
Always kind of like Jimmy Cricket for the group. Like, he stands his ground. He might cause the fights, but he knows that he's kind of like right. He's not stubborn because he's got parents that kind of back him up and tell him like how to handle these situations. Yeah. He'd also probably throw out to his parents like, how do you handle an alien invasion? And they probably have an answer for him.
Well, there's no such thing as alien invasion, so there you go. Okay, cool. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thanks.
So I just like that. I love the fact that they did something very small, and all they did was introduce 5 characters maybe, and then kind of flush out a little bit more of, Mike's family and how Mike's parents, and arguably how useless they are. And you even get a line from Dustin that says, "You guys are useless. Like, you're not doing shit."
Yeah, I lost it for that line.
And I love that part because I think something that we talked about in season 1 is, I think even Mocha brought this up of, the parents in this series, in this universe, besides Joyce, are absolutely useless and just blinded to, and they're not there. And so in this one here, again, we have, besides Joyce, who's a little different, all the other parents doesn't like, although they seem to be caring about their child at that moment, and you get a couple of montages of them like taking pictures. I thought that was really cute, and like even for for Halloween and for the dance at the end. So I thought that was a very nice sort of character moments that's actually happening at the end there. But then you also kind of get more information from them. But at the end of the day, they still are pretty useless as just the characters. They just don't. They didn't really kind of take the initiative and cared about their child and what their 10, 11-year-old is running off and doing.
But it helps. Yeah, it kind of helps ground the kids' characters in, like, even though this is sort of like a sci-fi horror mystery show that is kind of unbelievable, it grounds them. Like in traditional kids' stories, when stuff starts to go insane, it's as soon as the parents disappear, but the parents are kind of active throughout, and all this wackadoo stuff is still happening, and they're going on with their lives kind of ignoring it, but the kids are dealing with the problems. But you love the kids so much because you know that they have to deal with their parents' bullshit too.
Yeah. It's a cool thing.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, Blue. I'm going to toss it over to Abbott. Tell me some ones that you got of Stranger Things Season 2.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's going to be some overlaps, but what I love is that even though we had a great plethora of amazing characters from the first season, we were introduced to so many new good ones. And right off the bat, I just want to say we have the TV muted right now, but there was a Buffalo Wild Wings commercial, and it had the lumpy arcade nerd informant guy from Stranger Things in it. And I think that is amazing because he's one of the best ones, and I hope he is getting ready to take Hollywood by storm because I only see great things in that kid's future. For all I know, he might be 50 years old. I don't know.
56.
56. But also, the only bit of Barb we saw was her corpse. That's great because I hated Barb. Drunk Nancy is by far one of the best characters we were introduced to. Drunk Nancy was hilarious, and I think the internet needs to really hit up the Drunk Nancy memes because I haven't seen any yet, and I haven't found any yet, so we really need to get on that internet.
I'm searching for them right now.
This is all bullshit. The party guy who made the punch that is pure. That's me. That's who I want to grow up to be.
That's all of us at every party ever.
When I turn 21, that's who I want to be.
But Sean Astin's Bob was also pretty amazing. He's like Rudy. He really just wants to try, but at the end of the game, he gets sacked.
That's so good.
I do, going back to what you guys said, Steve's 180 from being like, he's still a douche, but he takes on more responsibilities, and he kind of just shrugs off Nancy, totally not wanting him, and she's having a hard time admitting it. He's like, you know what, it's fine, whatever, I'm cool. I have enough gel in my hair shielding my brain from these emotions that I can deal with it. And he still becomes a badass character. That's pretty awesome. But the big thing for me was the fact that there were more monsters this season, which is a big thing for me. But I think the more I thought about it, season 1 taking place like a little bit earlier in the 80s sort of reflects the horror movies at the time where you had kind of this monster or a slasher, and there was one big bad, like the Demogorgon is chasing everybody, and it's like these slow kind of like grind, burn, takes forever for him to finally get you. Meanwhile, when you're moving into the mid-'80s, you get these other movies like Gremlins, Ghoulies, Chud, where there's like multiple monsters, and it's like kind of this big crazy fest, and that's sort of what the Demidogs were, and I loved that. But
it's
also
like Alien versus Aliens.
Exactly, yeah. And then the other big thing was just the call-outs to other movies and the references, like the part where Dart gets too big and jumps out of the box and escapes for the first time, and the music hits, and you're like, that's almost Gremlins music. Oh, this is like that scene in Gremlins where he gives the monster to the guy in the school. Like, this is kind of like a callback to that. It was great. And then the scene also, like Mike said, Evil Dead is kind of called out a few times in the movie where the shadow monster is sort of bearing down on them. It does the crazy through the woods camera shot. Totally the exact same shot. Different woods, but, splitting image. And I think that's great because they know what they're doing, obviously. And in my opinion, it's weird, but I think that this season, at least in my opinion, was way better than the first season. So that's bold words, but I think so. I mean, I know we're introduced to all the characters, and that's always like a fun part of getting to meet everybody in the first season. But I think at this point, I think what the people who worked on this show did was they took a lot of, because there was so much fan feedback, they took a lot of that and they actually put that into the second season. They gave us what we wanted, which really at the end of the day is what we want. We want to see what we want to see. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. That's some bold words. I'm interested. That's a question I'm going to ask the group before we get into our sort of criticisms, or maybe even after. But yeah, that's a good point, because I don't know.
I got more out of this season that I wanted that I might have not known that I wanted versus the first season when I didn't know what to expect. Like going into this one, I thought I knew what to expect, and then I was like pleasantly surprised more so. I was like, wow, this was a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Oh.
Not that I thought it was going to suck or anything, but that was it.
Cool. And then I'll end with my wins. I'm not gonna. I'll go ahead and like kind of glaze over a couple of these sort of repeats that we already have. Love Bob. Bob's a superhero by far. Bob, you're the true MVP. The fact that you know how to do basic, and they even get like, we know that this started in 1984, and there was a quick call out to an Apple computer and how he's actually reprogramming everything, which is actually pretty cool. I just loved his character. I mean, I think when we're introduced to his character early on, we're like, this dude is corny. He is terrible. And I think we are easily, as an audience, is geared to not like his character because everybody else is like, he doesn't quite fit in.
Oh, the Dracula joke. I hope it doesn't suck. I wanted to hate that joke.
Well, that's not that, but he's like, I think the moment that I fell in love with Bob, when he was like, Mr. Mom? I was so excited. And at that point, I was like, I love this guy. He can do no wrong, you know? He's the only person to kind of tell Will actually advice on what to do.
Yeah, good advice if you're like facing a bully or something.
Yeah,
like that.
or like, I mean, it probably wasn't the best advice, but everybody else, and he even Will mentioned something like, you know, stop treating me differently, like I'm the same. He treated him as if he just wanted to help. He was trying to give him some words of encouragement, be that father figure, be that parental figure that arguably Joyce needed to be, but she wasn't. And any other actual parent in this actual show needed to be that, but they literally didn't give a shit about their children. Nancy and freaking John were gone. Yeah, Nancy and John were gone for like 3 or 4 days. Got abducted. It went over like nobody has any idea what's happening to them. And every time John would call back to his house, the phone would keep ringing. So
they banging.
Yeah, so they banging. Yeah,
you banging.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really like Bob. Like Bob's superhero, like he made like a crazy, like a amazing sacrifice that he was way out of his league for, but at the same time, he still did that. So I love his character. I just love everything that they introduced about how corny he was going to be, but he was just being a supportive dude who just got caught up in the craziness. And I'm glad he died because we needed somebody that we care. I knew he was going to die. Arguably, I knew he was going to die. I was like, it's something. He's too likable at this point. He's going to have to die. Sorry, Hopper, but be careful, bro. I think you're next up. I'm just saying. I love a lot of the video game sort of kind of not quite tropes, but like references of you have single player and you have, for instance, you have Dustin trying to figure out this monster issue by himself, and then you get co-op mode, and you have Dustin, and then you get Steve to go and like try to hunt this Demogorgon, but that doesn't necessarily work. So then you get a party, then you have 4 people, then they're building the plans, and these are like arguably like video game levels and things that they're actually doing. You have King of the Hill, you have a Guardian, you have somebody going through. Like you can see these video game sort of modes or levels or sort of what's the name of it? Like playlists or I can't remember the name. Scenarios. Like they are like literally in this actual show from time to time, and all these little like weird things happening all throughout. And I think one of the best moments I liked was 11 is actually closing the gate. You have Hopper protecting her and just mowing down all these others like dimmy dogs like all around her. And I was like, that's a great sort of necessarily kind of moment. But that was pretty cool.
One. First of all, again, that scene can't be understated how absolutely beautiful it was with the silhouette of her like with both hands out, and then him just like turning around, just blowing demi dogs away.
Yes.
That could be like a desktop wallpaper for your living room. The one thing I would say, it's funny. I wrote down a con about that exact thing, and I didn't even think about it because I didn't read your pros until I wrote down my con. I felt that they did a great job of having that central narrative in the first season where they start off playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then it kind of evolves, and they kind of tell you parts of the story before it happens by using Dungeons and Dragons, and then at the end, the whole thing makes sense as a D&D thing. Whereas I felt like they could have gone bigger with video games because they went to the arcade a couple times, where they could have talked about that and almost laid out they didn't have to do the exact same thing where they had to climb a bunch of ladders with barrels falling down on them so they could beat up a monkey. They don't quite have to do that, but I thought they could have done a little bit more to really make it seem like, hey, this is how we're gonna organize this season. Now, I'll give you that's a good point. I didn't even think about the whole co-op and all that fun stuff and single player, King of the Hill. But I don't know, a little bit more references to power-ups. Power-ups are distinctly a video game thing, health packs. That could have been.
I mean, a lot of that stuff, though, from what you're mentioning, I think they're transitioning out, right? Season 1, we see a lot of board game playing. Season 2, now we've got a lot of, like you just said, arcade electronic games. And so, with these arcade games that's been happening for right now, there's not, the Call of Duties. There's, a bunch of other games that's necessarily there. They really mention Dig Dug a lot, and they really kind of go into some of these video games, but, it's still very tower based. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see the next time this happening if it's going to be actual at home games and things be necessarily kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, even the stuff you were talking about, they had single player and co-op arcade, but I don't know if they had King of the Hill or any of that fun stuff. I don't think arcades could really do it.
I mean, probably. I didn't go to play the arcade games a lot, but I'm assuming they have something similar to it.
I have an arcade in my basement, so I'll. No, I'm just kidding.
One of the things I was going to say as a minus for me was the fact that they didn't have as much D&D references, but I think that lends to what you're saying is as the 80s progressed, D&D became less prevalent, and then video games started to become on the rise, and I think that's sort of the transition that happened there was... you were saying, some of the themes, Dig Dug, I think, was just big in general because of, the theme of, the tunnels and, everything happening.
Yeah.
And,
Well, even from that, I'll toss you into that, is I thought it was very interesting of a lot of these throwaway lines and a lot of these, a lot of this dialogue that the teacher, I can't remember his name, but the science teacher was talking about, of, biology and, minds, hives, and stuff like that, was actually what was happening. There was some crazy foreshadowing that was happening in this actual show. So I thought that was kind of fun. But I think it's also interesting of season 1, they start off playing Dungeons and Dragons. Season 2, they're scrambling to get some coins to go to an arcade. And I think that's a nice, sort of progression.
Yeah, I'm not even
raising the stakes of things.
I'm not even looking for the references. I don't need them to be oh, and then, I went and played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. I think that it would have been nice to see just more thematic references like they did with Dungeons and Dragons. They could have been a little bit more over the top with it just to keep consistent with that, because you're right, it did transition away towards video media, and I think they could have supported it a little bit more. I love the fact that they ended on the school dance because that is so deliciously 80s. That being said, I would have also loved to have seen them at the arcade as the final scene, with Max fully incorporated as a member of the group, all sitting around playing video games together. Because that's how the first season ended. And again, it would have just tied it together a little bit better.
I like that point. I think it could have gone either way, because they progressed the story of, how games are played and how this party is going to be, behaving. But now we also see that these kids are slowly growing up. So not to say that they're not going to play any more video games. No, but this is probably the first dance that they're ever going to go. Well, I think this is the first dance, their opportunity to go to a dance, and seeing how they're awkwardly kind of going there, a bunch of nerds, arguably, because Mad Max is in there too. A bunch of nerds kind of being out, and Zombie Boy being asked to a dance for the first time in his life. With all the shit that fucking Will was going through. Thank God he had somebody ask him out to go to.
Yeah, Will got laid.
I don't know about that. I think
We'll be begging.
We'll be begging buyers? All right.
Yeah. Next season, magic cards.
Yeah, it's possible. Sure. Yeah, so I think that's a good. Or Pogs maybe.
Oh, Pogs.
Oh, yeah, who knows?
Oh.
I think Pogs is like early '90s though.
No, it would be like a console. It'd have to be like the Super Nintendo.
Right. Well, I think it may be a Atari. Arguably,
oh yeah,
it could be.
One of the kids has.
I mean, they're pretty close to late '80s, early '90s. Yeah.
Box up with toys.
Right. Okay. So I like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to kind of unpack there. A couple other wins that I want to kind of talk about. I like the fact that they raised the stakes. They started this episode. They started this season off with we're introduced to 8, and we're like, oh shit, like that's crazy. And they really kind of raised a lot of things that the first season kind of started asking us some questions about. They either raised it or kind of just further that story arc or storyline about. And I'm interested to see if we're going to have any other characters. Like 11 went through a lot of these children's profiles, and like just she was looking through. She went through a lot of these actual children's like faces and stuff that's in there. So maybe that's something that we can go through, but I'm liking the fact that they're doing some slight world building and things are actually happening out there. So I like that. And I think the last thing I want to talk about is like just some music, and I would hope that Derek is listening, because me and Derek went through and we have been talking about just movie scores all the time. He mainly talks a lot about Star Wars, which is amazing. If you ever have a chance, this guy's amazing. Anyways, so we were talking about this music a lot, and I just love I love the synths in this, but I also just love the fact that it was a combination between all these 80s references, themes, like you name it, they kind of really jam-packed everything into it. And I think one of the best examples I can think of, and it's funny because Sean Astin's character is in the Goonies, and the Goonies soundtrack has a couple of songs that are, I think, like no lie.
Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, Cyndi Lauper for sure. No, but like the Goonies score, not soundtrack. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
The Goonies score is taken a lot from this. Now, the Goonies score as a whole is much more French Orange, much more lively, much more adventure based. So you can look at that score and think of more like Peter Pan. Like, it's way more upbeat than this. But there's a couple songs in there that's very slow that are, there's a and from the score, it's called Walking in Hawkins, and it's almost like very close, and it's obviously heavier on the synths, but it's actually like very interesting and it's very cool. And even me and Abbott were listening to the It soundtrack, and not as close, but very dark tones, and it was like it's in order to do like certain things. And this soundtrack, I have listened to it so much, and it just puts me in like just a nice like relaxing, but at the same time that it starts to build, and the tension from song to song to song, and the score itself does build tension. And I just love that. And even the regular soundtrack was just absolutely phenomenal. All the actual sort of songs they kind of put in this, and just great to listen to, and I just loved it. Literally every point I could think of. It was good. So let's get into some criticisms, because we talked a lot about things that we liked about it. I'm interested to hear and talk about how much he may be wrong, but who knows. Brylan, tell me a lot of criticisms of things that just didn't quite work for Stranger Things 2.
Yeah, let's get to hating. So, I mean, I would say like the big thing that really disappointed me about this season was that breaking up the team to have all these other tangential storylines and have them compartmentalized.
We just lost Brylan there.
It actually weakened a lot of the characters, and there was a lot of stories that really didn't need to be told, and it wasted a lot of time where they could have had a tighter, more cohesive story. I mean, one of the big ones is Nancy and John's journey. They finally hook up and have sex and whatever, but it's kind of silly to have this whole thing like, let's find justice for Barb thing, and even bring back up Barb, because this is them pretty much kind of giving what they say is the fan reaction what they want, but it goes to show you maybe you shouldn't give the fans what they want all the time, because this story totally didn't work at all. It was terrible. It was shitty. That fucking reporter was the absolutely worst thing about this series this season as well. There was some other storylines that, I mean, I didn't really find compelling, like Harper's and Eleven's relationship at the beginning. There was nothing set up in season 1 to make Hopper out to be this raging asshole that he actually started as, unless I'm totally missing something. And at the end of season 1, there's a whole thing of Hopper putting Eggos inside this box in the forest. And I think this quick explanation of how when 11 took out the Demogorgon and she disappeared, then suddenly she's in the Upside Down, she just finds a quick exit out of there, and Hopper's just hiding her. Kind of like just, it actually takes away the reason behind that box. There's no reason for him to be dumping Eggos in that box if he's hiding her in this cabin in the woods. It makes no sense at all, and it's like, I think they use it as a matter of convenience, just to have a scene.
Brown.
I thought that he put that in there because she knew that she was still around, and so I guess I assumed that Hopper had been like at least kind of tracking her, knew where she was gonna be. That's why she was using the box, and then from there she ended up kind of following him, and then they went to the cabin in the woods, and like that was.
Yeah, that was a logic jump. It was like one of those acceptable ones for me. That was like, all right, well, he kind of figured out she got out, and then figured out how to attract her. I was okay with that one. I was also okay with the whole relationship in general. I think they did a good job through a series of flashbacks. Like, they actually used flashbacks effectively to show how the relationship got to where it was. So you started off and you were presented with a year has changed. And they even say it, like 200 days we've been living here together. And you were presented with how the relationship was then. And then they showed kind of going back from her start getting out of the Upside Down and then through her development in the cabin, how the relationship gradually eroded. So yeah, it was a little bit jarring in the first episode, but I felt that once you got through and started, entering like the expositional stage of the plot, it really brought light of why those actions made sense.
Yeah, it just didn't start off really well, and like that kind of made me start to hate characters I love, even like 11. That it's like she's acting totally pointless compared to where she was at the end of season 1, and Hopper's acting totally pointless. They needed something to build up to those moments, and it really didn't do that. They just suddenly just cut to like, okay, they're trying to build a relationship, and all of a sudden it's falling apart immediately.
Well, I think they
didn't do a good job of it.
For me, I thought I'm gonna completely agree with you on this point you're making, except for this one where I think they did really do a good job of showing how like pragmatic Hopper can be, and then how unpragmatic a 13-year-old can be. I think they really showed that, like, hey, Hopper's completely in the right here to do this. If he was dealing with, like, a full-grown adult who also has a similar, like, mindset, but he's not. He's dealing with someone who's crazy hormonal, because that's what teenagers do, and that they don't make great decisions. And then you throw superpowers into this mix, and then you have a recipe for disaster.
I mean, I think it was also a little bit along the lines of just he doesn't, like, he still hasn't quite, like, I don't think he ever will, but he lost a daughter, and he lost, like, a marriage and stuff like that, so he's still trying to figure out, like, how to be a parent and how to, be supportive for it, and the best thing that he can think of is, he lost one daughter, so he doesn't want to lose another one, and try to be, like, as overprotective as possible and try to do all the stuff to make sure that she's safe, she can't do anything, that she's safe. And it's not up until the point where she's not his daughter. Like, she's not his sickly daughter, right? She's completely different, and they start learning how people, like, how each other are, and this how they're going to be living with each other, like, later on. I can see why this is going off the point of why he was so, like, kind of angry and kind of, like, just upfront about that. And I was also looking at that too, but Hopper is a broken character, a broken man, and that's some of the reasoning I can get from behind that.
Brian.
Yeah, but I mean, it didn't really. I mean, it never really came across as like. I mean, I could see him being overprotective, and I'm not necessarily saying he should have been nice and understanding for everything that Eleven's going through. Yeah, that wouldn't be realistic, but he comes off as a straight up asshole to her, and that I could not get around. I mean, that was just throwing me off for so much, and it really put a bad taste in my mouth to start off this season.
Hey.
But there were some other things that, like, there were some characters that you love in the first season that really didn't get any due this season. Like Joyce is kind of like there in the background the whole time, and yeah, she had her moments with Will, but she really didn't have the impact that she did in the first season. And I think kind of part of that is because Will is there, her kids are there. She has something that is conflicting with her life, but she has a little bit more stability this time. So I think they went ahead and actually just pivoted the focus to some other characters this season. And along with that, Mike, being a young kid that heart's broken and everything, you don't go straight up and just start being a dick. To your friends, usually you confide in your friends when you're that age, or you may have like your violent bursts, but you're not going to always be like that every single moment. And maybe there was like some scheduling conflict between this and it, because we saw Finn Wolfhard. He knows that he's got acting chops, and if you give him a scene, he's going to do something good with it. He did it in season 1. He did it in it. And he felt really wasted in this season. And it was kind of disappointing to see that character actually get degraded the way he did as well.
Yeah, I mean, we even kind of talked about this before, and I just think that the fact that 11 was on her own sort of self-discovery, and I really wish that they would kind of put, like, I wish, now look back, I'm like, is Mike the leader of this group? And if that's the case, why is Mike the leader of this group? Is he the DM? Because I wasn't, like, I know that he was in season 1, and I get that. And if that's the case, that just also needs to be a little bit more kind of clear of, like, talking about, like, rules and stuff like that. Like, but arguably, it was just a huge sense of jealousy, especially if Dustin, like, arguably, right, Dustin's off and, like, hanging out with Steve. Lucas is going and got Mad Max he wants to bring into the actual group. Will is still... Well, god damn, I feel bad about that kid, but he's still doing his own thing in Upside Down. And, you know, it definitely felt like, in a sense of, in the season 1, like, he was the person, he was the main person, the people, like, went to him, and there was a lot of focus on him, and he could actually make sure things was actually happening. But now season 2, everybody's out doing their own thing, growing to be like young, you know, boys and teenagers for the most part, besides Will. But, you know, they're starting to, like, do some of that stuff, and he's still sort of in the same sort of he's in the same position. So I really wish that they would have give him a little bit more instead of just sitting around waiting for Al the entire time.
Yeah, or give a moment early, like during like the Halloween trick or treating or something, where the rest of the gang starts challenging his leadership and stuff.
Yeah,
and give some type of reason for why they start to break up, instead of it's just like, oh, we're just randomly going to start to do shit separate from one another. Yeah. There's no, it doesn't connect the audience, and you don't care about any of these separate ways that they actually start doing.
A couple of monologues when he's trying to find Al on the actual walkie-talkie, like, and you just extend those scenes out just a little bit so that you can actually see him. Like, the man's, like, depressed, he's heartbroken, like, he's alone, he feels secluded. Like, there's a lot of emotions that you can be packing in there in those scenes, as we just see the repetition of that too. And that, even that off screen would have helped out a little bit more motivation for his character of why he has such this pent up anger to his friends, because he feels like no one's there for him, and that's also makes sense why he's so angry with Hopper for hiding this from him, because he's been feeling this way for an entire year. He didn't necessarily need to feel this way, and so that also makes sense. But we need that information. We need to see that scene before his anger and his actions also kind of like take hold.
Yeah, absolutely. Some other thing. There's some other characters here that really didn't. Sorry, that didn't really actually play any big role. Like we're introduced to Billy and Max earlier, new brother and sister duo. That even though I do like how this whole Dustin, Max, Lucas triangle plays out, how Dustin's like strong at the very beginning, Lucas just like bides his time till the right moment. That's done really well. But Max, as a character herself, I mean, she's just there. She's just there to be like this pretty girl that some of the other kids actually have a crush on, and see if who actually ends up with her. And then Billy, I mean, they have this talk, and like Hopper's talking to the agents at the Hawkins Institute and everything. They're constantly talking about, hey, Russian spies, Soviet agents that are in Hawkins, and Hopper's joking it off, whereas the scientists, I mean, we already know like what type of crazy shit's going down at the Hawkins Institute. That, I mean, they're kind of super serious about this, and then you see these two characters introduced, and they introduce them as brother and sister, and then you see Billy say, hey, she's not my sister, and kind of be a little not overbearing, but he shits on her and like starts barking orders at her and stuff, and you're like, oh, this would be pretty neat if these two turned out to be KGB agents or something. And I mean, at the end, it turns out to be like they just have a really shitty dad, and they're half siblings or step siblings. And Billy's a shitty person because his dad's a shitty person. It's trickle down bullynomics, essentially.
Yeah, they felt like they added those characters.
It came out weak.
They felt like they added those characters to add characters. I had the same thing written down, Brown. I feel like we're in very much alignment on this, where like they basically just added people because they needed more stereotypical 80s characters to put in the show to appease fans. They really didn't add anything to the storyline. Like, they wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. In fact, they just proved as jumping off points so that you could like film a couple scenes here and there at different locations. I didn't think that they were going to be KGB agents. My weird theory was that they were also mutants. And that's why Billy was super overprotective, because Max was another one of those, those powered people, let's say. And I thought they were going to figure that out in the third act, and like you'd see that interaction play off.
Or she's like the Russian version of the same project.
Yeah.
Not even Russian, just another version that, got loose. And I thought that there was going to be no parents involved whatsoever, because their parents didn't show up till, episode 7 or something. I thought it was just going to be him trying to take care of her, and you develop that backstory based on that. But yeah, those two made literally no difference on the plot, except to marginally make Steve's progression. Steve didn't really progress. He was just kind of a badass that you knew from the first season, and then he hit a road bump, and he was still kind of a badass afterwards.
But he got beat.
He was a bit more wise badass after that.
Yeah, but he got beat on the basketball court. He got beat up pretty badly at the end there. I thought for sure that the way that they were setting this up was that they were introducing Billy's character just to die, because there's a lot of reasons to hate Billy. I don't think he has any redeeming characteristics with this character at all. And you feel bad for him because you see the weird relationship and the difficult and abusive relationship with his father, but he doesn't do anything that you want to feel anything good for his character. And so I thought where they were going with it is that they were just going to kill Billy because he just didn't believe or whatever, and that's how Max is kind of thrust in, because she's also has some sort of kind of weird loss, or even going off of what Mike was talking about, if we would have ended it at an arcade, Mad Max would have been the perfect person to then get them more towards an arcade and just schooling them all, and that's how she's this person. That's how she kind of goes into being this. That's how she's a part of this party there. Like she's like literally the guru of arcade games, and like she's just better than everybody there. But they just didn't do that, and I thought it was kind of confusing to me that I felt like those characters were just kind of for the characters' motivation themselves is a bit wasted. But for Lucas' motivation, sure, a little bit like you were saying, a little bit for Steve, sure, but even Dustin and how he wants to kind of grow on his own, sure, okay, but for themselves, it was kind of weird.
Yeah. You guys are saying that now, but I think considering that they're both still there, like I have some of the same gripes. Like Billy was kind of useless considering how much of an asshole he was throughout the season. I thought it was going to like culminate, but we don't know. Third season, it could be revealed that like they are all Russian spies and the parents are their handlers. Some crazy bullshit. I feel like Stranger Things has, for me at least, the vibe for me has always been like, don't trust anybody because nobody is necessarily what they seem. Because I also thought that like Bob was going to be a spy. That was the big thing for me, is I thought he was going to be like put in there by the Hawkins Institute to keep an eye on Joyce and Will, and like that was going to be a twist. And then when it didn't happen, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, Rudy.
Yeah. The other thing I thought that was
they really didn't have any like illuminating payoffs in this season. It was.
The other thing,
everything came out kind of very mundane.
Well, the other thing I thought was a bit strange was, why did Billy hate Lucas in particular so much? And
you and I talked about this.
Yeah, we talked about this a bunch, and the first time I watched it, I glazed over it. I was like, oh, okay, Billy doesn't want Mad Max to hang out with the nerd so that she's not associated with that. And then I watched it again, and I had to stop and go back, and I was like, well, wait, the dialogue that he used was talking about his kind, his don't hang out with his type, or something like that, and like physically goes and attack Lucas, and I was like, are they talking about some like undertones of racism here, or what's happening for right now? Because that wasn't really a thing in the Stranger Things like universe.
Yeah.
But this family came from California, and they kind of uprooted to Hawkins now. So are they bringing these things that we just haven't seen before in this universe? I was very confused about that. I wasn't sure why or what they were trying to do from that. So I was kind of I wasn't sure.
I took it as just like he didn't want her hanging out with anyone, and Lucas just seemed to be the one that was kind of closest behind her.
Yeah.
So, and like he was the only one. So the reason I think he beat him up, in the house, was he was the only one that he saw at the arcade. Like he just kind of stood out.
I mean, like the scene that he's talking about Lucas particular, not like all those kids, right? The scene that he's talking about Lucas in particular in the car. That was the scene that I was like, oh,
yeah.
Is that racist?
Is that racist? Yeah, I got weird vibes from it too. I feel like he was kind of being like, don't hang out with black people. And it was the first, because I've only seen it the one time, but like it even came off to me in that one instance being like, that's kind of fucked up. And it's weird that like we're taking more, like we're more caught off guard and more upset about that. It's like that, like the fact that suddenly this kid is racist bothers me more than the fact that there's monsters. Like I'm more upset at this racist kid than I am at the monsters existing.
There's happening. Come on. Why are we talking about racism here? There's fucking monsters killing Barb, who no one cares about.
Well, the monsters can be racist. The monsters are probably racist, too.
The monsters are racist because only white people die.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
True.
They just eat people, so maybe they're specious.
Shut up.
No, they eat cats.
I mean, maybe they were trying to make him like an homage to the Bully and Stephen King's It. I don't know. It's hard not to parallel these two because they came out so close, and also it is something from the 80s, and like that Bully was a racist son of a bitch in it, so
yeah,
who knows? I mean, it just didn't make sense why Billy was there.
But that Bully also
Max.
ate it spectacularly at the end of that movie.
He did.
Spoilers, guys. Gosh, people haven't seen that. Bradley, anything else?
Yeah, so, I mean, just when it comes to the monsters, like in the first season, like Andrew said, we have the Demogorgon in the first one. It's kind of like that how the hell are we going to stop this type of monster because nothing's working, and what it takes to actually beat the Demogorgon in the first season. You could say, like, I mean, just inconsistent power levels for the creatures here. The Demogorgon dogs, when you see them, it's like, okay, you're dealing with a whole pack of Demogorgons. This city's fucked. But they turned out to be pushovers and stuff. You can shoot them with shotguns and they die. You're like, oh, that's kind of weak. I mean, we already established Demogorgons are pretty tough bastards, and now you can just easily kill them with shotguns and stuff.
Did we see them die though? You talking about when Hopper was shooting at them?
Shooting at them and they fall down that chasm. I assume they're dead.
Well, cause the only reason why I asked that question is like he was shooting at it when they were eating Bob alive, and that didn't faze them at all. I think it was like kind of stunning them, but I thought that bullets weren't a thing because all the other characters and all those other guys in that actual facility was all shooting them, and those bullets weren't a factor.
Yeah, they were inconsistent with that. They were like they basically were when Hopper had magic bullets essentially.
No.
You know. Yeah, which I was surprised when he wanted to walk into the lab with 11. He's like, save your strength, I'll handle the heavy lifting at the beginning. I was like, what are you going to do, shoot him? And then, yes.
Magic bullets.
Yeah.
He did?
Yeah, that was completely a plot inconsistency.
Yeah, and another thing that was just kind of logically weird was that the Mind Flayer, so apparently cannot enter into the world unless the gate is like 5 miles tall as he is or whatever. But he can enter into Will and do all this stuff in the world anyway. So what's the point of opening the gate in the first place?
He didn't need a 5-mile hole to get into that little boy. Is that what you're saying, Brian?
He did not. He got into that little boy pretty easily.
Yeah.
And like Will wasn't even and they say like he can only touch me when I'm in the upside down, but Will wasn't. I mean, when he has these catatonic moments, is he thinking about the upside down or is he actually being teleported to the upside down? His body is still there and they actually are shaking him and stuff. So he's not going back to the upside down. He's having these visions of stuff in the upside down. And it really doesn't make any sense. What are they trying to do?
I thought it was because I guess in this one here, when Will kind of transitions and goes back and forth, I thought he's like, they said something about, there's a term about phase jumping or something like that he's physically moving in between both of the phases.
Yeah, he's between both the upside down and the real world.
So that's when the in the video camera kind of goes through, and that's when they couldn't find him. Then they up and just randomly finds him in certain moments. That's when he was like in the field. They kind of up and find him there. That is weird though, because like that's another kind of inconsistent plot point. Because in the field, they definitely see his body. He's definitely there, but this is mine not. But in other cases, he's like hitting, and then he kind of comes back. So that's a good call out. Yeah, I'm gonna rewatch that. Look at that. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, and I would say my last criticism I have is that season 1 did this really cool thing where thematically it balanced paying homage to 1980s nostalgia and doing this modern storytelling with newer high-tech equipment and stuff, and having like a digital shooting, but keeping something like grained in the 80s where you felt like it was like a nice balance between like, hey, is this like an 80s spoof of a horror movie, but also it's actually a new fresh take on a horror movie at the same time. It's kind of like John Carpenter's Teenage Wasteland, so to speak. And they kind of lost the whole nostalgia part. The music still does a really good job, but they don't really have those key moments, just like how John and Will are sharing that Clash song together, or how they have these different posters that they actually have in their houses. They don't have, like when they first pick up the walkie-talkies, you're like, oh shit, that's E.T. And they don't really have any seminal nostalgia moments that actually stand out and are kind of active in the world. In season 2, it's more like let's focus on the monsters and just let's have some family drama as well. And losing that nostalgia piece to the themes, I think hurts it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think they much like Blue was talking about before. Like, I think if they would have like just done more with some of these pieces, like arcade towers, like they went through and had this whole scene of like I can't remember the name of the arcade game they were playing together, but before they went over and checked Dig Dug and stuff like that. But they had went through the storyline of this in the arcade. And I wish there was more stuff like that. They could have done it, but they talked about hair a lot, so that was good.
Yeah, I mean, there were some. I think the biggest like nostalgia moment was Steve talking to Dustin about like how he does his hair. And he said Farrah Fawcett. I mean, that was like the best thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, like this season, what I found really disappointing based on the caliber that the first season actually began.
Blew it.
Yeah, so I had a couple things to echo Bryland one more time because going out right after each other, I feel we need to drive this home. It felt very fractured. The sub teams for me didn't quite work. I really loved in the first season where you had kind of Hopper and Winona Ryder working to like have that crazy episode trying to figure out what happened to Will, and then like the three kids together. And then, like, kind of the later age teenagers. And I think that they tried to develop everyone, but it just didn't work. They worked better in the classic teams than these new ones, which is, I guess, applaud you for, like, taking a chance. Just for me, it didn't work. The one thing really there was that, like, when you look back at the first season, you could definitely say that Mike was the main character. Maybe Hopper too, but like mostly Mike, and he really drove the plot forward. Warren, you even mentioned that he was the dungeon master. Now it felt like, well, Dustin is kind of the main character. Nancy had, led her own source. Hopper was there again. Mike took a backseat. He wasn't in half the show. It felt like, or he didn't have speaking lines. And then you have the new characters plus the moms and the parents, and it's like. I'm trying to think of what the last movie that did this really terribly. When you have an ensemble film, you still have to have a main character, and you have to make the ensemble work off of that main character. Now, it doesn't matter what the main character is, you just have to have a central point. And this season just didn't have that central point that you could have, everything else could act as a linchpin off of. I think I've said most of my other criticisms. The one last little thing to talk about, just in with other people, I thought the demi-dogs looked horribly cheap. The whole rest of it was beautifully done, but the CGI, when they were moving around, looked like a mid-2000s Resident Evil game, and it didn't look good. And it's going to age poorly.
It was weird that they were trying to do some things with the lighting with the dogs, but it still was coming up as looking pretty like it could have been better. The Demogorgon in the first season looked better than these Demi-dogs.
Because they kept him really dark for the most part.
No.
I mean, towards the end, you did see a lot of them.
Even when they were in that weird phase in between Upside Down and not where Elle was going to, and he was eating, he was completely lit up, and he still looked fine.
It looked awesome eating Barb.
Or actual someone in a
They
costume.
might have had.
They weren't costume. They were too small to be costumes, so they were 100% CG. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and they might have had, because that scene was relatively short than the amount of Hawkins laboratory scenes. They might have just run out of money. They could have busted all of their CGI budget doing that one lit up scene really well, and then had to spread those funds out. Although I looked it up, apparently the cost per episode was $8 million compared to Thrones. Game of Thrones is the most expensive, and that's $10 million. So the money was there. Yeah, most of my other criticisms can be referenced in other people's points. So look it up, suckers.
Abbott, apology.
Again, a lot of overlaps with some of the things that we're picking on. I'm not as nitpicky. I really enjoyed it, but sort of to go back to what I was saying in the preview was Will is the worst. I hate whiny kids in movies, and I wanted so much more for him, but he just seems like such a baby. Like, I know they want him to be, like, young and meek and all this, but he almost seems, like, younger than the other kids. Like, he seems like he's easy to be picked on. That's why everybody calls him Zombie Boy. But also, like, he's meek, and he doesn't have any, like, important lines, but when he does, he's possessed by the Mind Flayer, and even then it's like it seems a little hokey to me, but then besides that all he really did was like scream and shriek and convulse and stuff, so I think he's a wash of a character for me. I can't really care about Will because I still don't really know why he's the only one who's affected by the Upside Down, like
because he had that slug come out of his mouth.
Yeah, but Hopper got a money shot in the face of like upside down hour dust, and he's doing fine for all we know.
Yeah,
like,
that was super unexplained.
Hopper's tripping balls.
But yeah. Also, just the two major bad guys in this season, the Mind Flayer, Smoke Monster, and Billy, were kind of just a little bit of duds for me. And the fact that, like, thinking about the Mind Flayer as a D&D character, he's so nefarious, and like the design is really cool, and they kind of squandered that by making him this amorphous H.P. Lovecraft like smoke monster. Like, he wasn't really well defined, and he wasn't really that scary. I got super pumped when I saw the preview and you saw the giant tentacle monster wandering through the background. I was like, well, that's really cool. That's going to be something badass. And then it was just a cloud. It was like an angry fart that like went into Will's face and like took his brain over. Like, that's cool, I guess. But I feel like from a monster design standpoint, something that I'm really into, I wish they did a little bit more with it. But if you're telling me they spent $8 million on every episode, they probably didn't have enough money to throw into making that monster a little bit cooler.
They needed more smoke.
Yeah, Abbott, the way they did that preview, it made it seem like that, you know, the tentacle monster was just a small part of the Upside Down. Like, oh, you only saw the Demigorgon, you have no idea what else is out there. And as it turns out, he is the only thing out there. You know.
And that's where it almost feels like, for the most, like, for me at least, Stranger Things is still this idea that's evolving. They're sort of making it up as they go along. Like, I know you said they have this grand plan for potentially 4 chapters and then they'll wrap it, but I feel like some of these things are still just occurring to them. So it's almost like, yeah, we can keep these monsters looking kind of amorphous and kind of non-defined, and that's how we'll go through this. But I think they could have made it a lot more scary. They could have pushed that a little bit more. Besides having, like, the real, like, a terrestrial villain like Billy kind of just not really do anything. Like, he threatens and he threatens. Like, his bark is bigger than his bite, and then nothing happens by the end of the season. Mm. But, like I said before, I'll backpedal a little bit. Maybe something will happen in the next season, what have you. But for the most part, those, like, not really paying off kind of bit into me a little bit. Bringing back Barb as, like a side thing. Her parents just seem really dumb. Like, I know, like, I can't imagine what it would be like trying to figure out, like, what happened to your dead daughter, or, like, they don't know she's dead. And that whole thing seemed like an afterthought, but they wanted it to be this thing to progress Nancy and Steve's story, and then that kind of fell apart because then Nancy kind of disappeared for a little while, and she was sort of there, but not. And, like, the whole ending it on the snowball, or the snowball, I guess, for me was
I was like, what?
They get snowball, then it's amazing.
There's many definitions to that.
But, like, I know they talked a little bit about it. Mike and Eleven talked about it, and, like, it would have been, I think that was a big fan service thing. It was another one of those things where I said before, they're listening to us and they're making us give us what we want, but, like, that's not. It seemed cheesy to me. It, like, all came together, and it was like everything's nice, but then they had the looming monster at the end. But it would have been cool if they were, like, at the arcade and it, like, kind of looped around, or, like, they could have done something else, or, like, given us more of a check-in with more characters in general, less just this, here's all the boys, like, finding out what it's like to get with girls and touch a boob, or what have you. But, I don't know, I thought the ending was a little cheesy. Didn't necessarily get me pumped for another season like the end of the first season did. But I am still pumped for the next season. And then sort of to counter what I think, Brylan, you said, like, I think the episode where Eleven goes on her, like, self-discovery road trip is actually, to me at least, the weakest episode of the season. I think it was distracting. I think it came across like a filler episode in anime. It was just like, well, here's this thing. We kind of referenced it at the beginning of the season, but here's kind of what happened. Like, all of the characters besides, like, her and 11 and 8 in that episode are just cannon fodder. Like, you don't care about any of those people.
Yeah.
Like, they all kind of suck. They're, like, ripped right out of Return of the Living Dead. They're just, like, crust punks who live on the streets. Like, I don't like them. I'm not going to like them. They're not even, good characters. So it was kind of, that whole episode was a wash to me. You could have taken it out. We could have had an 8-episode season again, and I would have been fine with it.
The creature from Mimic's about to eat them and stuff.
Yeah.
But, I could see that point, but also I think it was really good just to get away from all the other disjointed bullshit storylines that were happening in the other episodes as well. And it was good to just focus on one character and give them, like, some type of cohesive story through one episode.
Yeah, like, I think there should have been an 11-centric episode. Like, I enjoyed the conversation when she found out who her mom was. Like, I think those scenes were really great, and, like, her exposure to that was really great, but I think maybe they could have introduced 8, or the fact of the matter that there were obviously more than just 11. And I think that could have not even been touched until the next season. Like, it could have drawn out further. It could have been a long con. Mm-hmm. But now it almost seems like there's 8. Okay, now we see her for an episode, and we're probably never going to see her again. Next season, we're probably going to see, like, 10 or, like, 3. We'll see another, like, random one, and then it'll just be like, oh, okay, well, now you're my new brother, or you're my new sister. Like, it kind of could go interchangeably. But, I don't know. I think I want to see more of 11 and how she sort of matures into, like, a normal human being and how she learns to talk. Like, for me, the best part of that episode was her coming out of it looking like a hair slicked badass, but also the fact that she learned the word bitchin'.
Bitch.
Yeah, it's like, that's it. That's all I got from that episode was bitchin'.
So good. Yeah. I mean, I think one call out that I would make from your points there, Abbott, was if we would have had like a scene, if they go into the snowball, if they would have went to the snowball, they would have had their dance, they would have done their thing, everything would have been the same there, and they would have been like, oh, well, like, that's it? It's like, oh, what time is it, right? And it's like,
yeah.
Oh, we only have, like, 45 minutes till the arcade closes.
Yeah.
Then they all go into
if that wasn't the end, it would have been okay.
Then they all want to go into the arcade, and at the arcade, if the shadow monster, not the smoke monster, they said it.
Or they find out that the lumpy nerd guy is actually the shadow monster.
It's weird. But
the Cheetos guy?
It would have been like looming over the arcade and not the school, because we actually weren't even at the school. I guess
for the balls.
The snowballs they were.
Oh yeah.
No, he got possessed at the school. But I think that would have been if there would have been like some like middle ground there.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a little bit more sort of like just believable and like more true to the characters. And I think that's another hark from what Blewett was talking about before. Instead of like giving us one or the other, just give us a mixture of both, because I'm sure they would have then ran and tried to get to the arcade as quickly as possible, and Steve would have drove them, or Joyce would have drove them, like somebody would have necessarily drove them, and it would have been awesome to see 11 play her first arcade game.
Or then they find out that like the high score in Dig Dug suddenly Mad Max is 2, and the first one is like Smoke Monster. Smoke Monster has
Shadow
a high score. Shadow Monster.
Shadow Monster.
Who's this mind player?
So, I just looked something up because I was intrigued on this. This has nothing to do with anything anyone's talking about. Do you know who Billy is?
Yeah.
The actor?
Yeah.
The Red Ranger.
The Red Ranger.
The Red Ranger.
Yeah. That's a good point, because one of my only other cons is that the other Power Rangers didn't show up and they didn't fight the Smoke Monster and the Megazord. No, but really, the fact that there is so much tension between Billy and Steve, I really wanted that to pay off in some like weird, like Billy is in love with Steve, or like there's this strange reveal where things potentially happen between them. There's a lot of stuff about it online, and I think it's like that would be an interesting turn. I think it's going to be.
They showered together. So.
They did. There was we don't know what was happening off frame in that in that scene.
Yeah.
Was Billy smoking a cigarette while playing basketball?
No, I don't think.
He was doing that while he was working out.
I feel like he had like the perma-cig every time. Like he was in the shower, cigarette smoking.
In the shower, just completely wet. He's still
Just like a cigarette hanging out.
I used to play ultimate frisbee with a kid who would light up in the middle of it. He would be playing defense with like a butt hanging out of his mouth.
Oh man, if I had a nickel for every time I had a butt hanging out of my mouth.
There you go.
You'd have a nickel later tonight.
So, my criticisms actually have already been said. I guess the only thing that I would just kind of reiterate was going off of Avid's point about like a lull moments, and I really wish they would have maybe reorganized, and I think it would have felt a little bit less disjointed if this season would have started off of Elle running away, doing her self journey, doing all that stuff, and then necessarily kind of coming back. And when she comes back, she necessarily like that's when all this other stuff like starts happening. I think it could have been like these things could have been happening simultaneous because she didn't. Elle does not need to be in the cabin at starting off. So as their stuff is actually
if the fifth or sixth episode was actually like the second or third episode.
Yeah, like I think you would if they would have kind of shifted it. I think it would have made a little bit more better. Like it would have made a little bit more sense story wise because we already started off with introducing the 8. So right in 2 and 3, if like episode 3 is like kind of done and like Elle knows she needs to get back, or even episode 4. And then from 5 through 9, Elle's making her way back, and then she finally comes back at like episode 7, which is fine because then there's 2 episodes that we have with her. I think it would have made a little bit more sense, but I think the way that we got it was there was this weird kind of chunk in the middle that kind of takes us out of like what's happening in Hawkins? People are dying. So I think that would have made a little bit more sense, and I think that'll be arguably my biggest sort of criticism. Also to the fact that everybody on the internet is comparing Bob to Barb.
No. Bob is an amazing superhero of a man. Barb was in an episode for 2 seconds and then she got eaten. So
it's those would be like my 2 things. Like Bob was dope. Barb was useless. And I think I was listening to, I have to give a shout out to the Wicked Good Games podcast because they often talk about this a lot. But I think it's an interesting concept of Barb really was a useless character. Yeah.
Yes.
I would have.
Good riddance, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last criticism I'll say, and this kind of goes along with my like nostalgia and like creepiness factor that was really good in season 1 was like the whole child possessed drawing a big map of the city was not as creepy as the light play that they had first season. It's just like a waste of paper all over a house.
But I like that because that also kind of gives you that character. Like the reason why I did like it here is I think this is something else that they're going to be also introducing is that the buyer's house has to get fucked up. Every season, that buyer house is getting fucked up.
It's an Indian burial ground.
Yeah. And so we see them take this. Jimmy Gorgon is trying to kind of get out of the wall, and we have tons of lights and like freaking out, and you have this phone that keeps like sparking up and like kind of getting destroyed. To now, it takes it to, well, what is this? Like, we don't know what this is until Bob the superhero comes and it's like, oh. Like it's a map.
Smart guy.
Yeah. But then we also see like all this stuff that's around is actually kind of a map, and multiple characters have multiple ideas of what to do. Hopper kind of picks up on it really quickly and goes into his own thing, whereas then everybody else starts formulating their plan a little bit later and says, "Oh, let's actually see if we can kind of find him there." So I like that because they used it in 2 vastly different ways. Yes, it's still a sense of communication, but I just like that they didn't do a whole lights thing all over the place. They had a very subtle light moment with Mama and Elle's character, but they for the buyer's residence they changed it up a little bit, and I'm glad that it wasn't as flat, or it wasn't the same thing. So they at least gave us something new.
Did anybody else feel bad for all those pumpkins?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Killed a lot of pumpkins.
A lot of pumpkins. I feel bad for the kid who got his candy stolen for like $5.
Not stole. I mean, $5 in like 80s money is like $3 nowadays.
All right. So, with that, we are going to hop into grades and lasting thoughts of Stranger Things Season 2. Brylan, college boy.
I'm going to give Stranger Things Season 2 a C. So, I still love these characters of this world that's been created. I think they lost a lot of magic that the first season had, and I hope Season 3 brings it back. I was just, like, very disappointed that they took this very tight, well-told story from the first season and it made it all disjointed and broken and, like, made you start to care less about these characters that they built up. To me, Season 2 should have been like the search for 11, and that should have been the whole season's motivation. And, like, what is the mystery behind why the Eggos go into the box every night? And why do they disappear? Where is she? What's happening? And maybe tie in this giant looming ominous from the Upside Down into that. Instead, we got a very wishy-washy season that had some really cool character moments, but nothing that was as compelling or significant as the first season.
All right. I mean, I agree with you, but I respect you, my friend. Blewett, grades?
Yeah, in similar fashion, I give it a B-. I think it was definitely above average entertainment. My God, I hate my grades from earlier this year so much. I feel like I come back to this every week. It just felt like too disjointed. It was beautiful to watch, and like the characters still kind of were there. You just had to like dig through a level of junk to see it. So, B-. It was still good. Definitely recommend watching it.
Okay. I disagree with you, but Abbott.
Yeah, I can echo your guys' feeling about the disjointedness, and I just think it's the fact that we introduced some new characters and we were hopping around a lot. But again, that's sort of going back to what I said. That's why I liked it. Is all the characters, they're all interesting. Like, I want to know where they're going and what they're doing. Even if it doesn't pay off, it was still worth it to me. Because like I said, it could happen. Like, I'm excited to see what happens next. Yeah. I still stand by the fact that I think second season was better than the first season. Mm-hmm. So I give it an A. Also, Hopper, I haven't said anything about him, but he was, again, an awesome badass this whole season. And the fact that he's going to be the new Hellboy just gets me even more excited because he definitely had some great moments in this season. It's like, that's Hellboy. I could totally see that being Hellboy. Just instead of like shooting off that assault rifle, he's just punching, monsters in the face with his giant rock hand.
Hell boners for Hellboy.
Your boners for Hellboy.
I am going to give Stranger Things Season 2 an A, like half plus. And I also think that this season is better than the first season. And I definitely agree with what you guys have said. I was going to say A plus before, but then I definitely kind of dropped it down. There was a bit of stuff that could be necessarily fixed, but I'm very glad that they expanded on a lot of these characters. Like, they're expanding on arguably everything. They may have expanded a bit too much, but I'm glad that they took something that we have that we were necessarily missing from the first, whether it's a supportive, like a fully functioning supportive sort of role model. And we're introduced to Hopper, who's trying to do as best as he can, but he's a flawed character. He's a badass, but he's a terribly flawed character, And we've then gone off and getting more information of, really it was the love that saved all these guys. I made a choice, and I think that was something interesting to say of, Lucas made a choice, and Dustin made a choice, and Hopper had to make a choice, and it's these difficult decisions that had to happen of, Dustin's choice in the end actually saved their lives. Lucas' choice in the end kind of sort of saved their lives a little bit because Mad Max kind of scared the shit out of Billy. And Hopper's choice may not have been like the best one, but this is like in the end, like it definitely kind of kept her safe to a certain degree because without that, she would have never necessarily ran away. So there's a little bit that you necessarily have to see there. And I just like the characters' motivations. It's like what we're necessarily doing. Like we talked about the music, we talked about the lighting, just the color palette alone. We didn't really talk about that. I think Blewett talked about lighting, but lots of darks and deep reds and just I'm just really enjoying exactly what they're necessarily doing, and you have a lot of characters that they may be in this series, but they don't really matter, like the parents and stuff like that. So I really, really enjoyed this. Like I said, I've watched it twice. I'm not sure which is more effective of just binging it straight because I had a blast doing that, or kind of giving it some time to breathe and kind of just really kind of thinking about these characters more and more. But I just really enjoyed it, and I really hope other people will. And if you don't, let me know why. You may be wrong, but still, I respect that.
For the total point that Billy and that reporter exist in this season, it should never get higher than a B.
Well, I mean, so Billy's character, yes, it could have been like some kind of like an extra character, and that was okay. He was not as bad as like Mike's father character. That dude should not have had any lines because he was absolutely useless. Billy's character at least drove motivations for other characters, and I see that. And we also kind of get a little bit of what's kind of going on in Billy's psyche. Maybe Billy can come back like Steve kind of came back in the first season. So there's ways that we can kind of get from that, and there's ways that we can kind of build from that actual character. So I get that. The reporter character, especially around that time, if they're talking about all these, like, and they introduce him very, very early on. If they're talking about a lot of, like, theories and things that necessarily kind of happening and just branching things off, and now that the story is out, right? Now that the story is out outside of Hawkins, that's how this Hawkins is going to get more impact and more people coming into Hawkins. That also can necessarily be built from there. So I understand what you're saying. I just don't agree with it because I think they still can be building off of a lot of other things that could come out from those two characters.
I will continue to disagree.
Yeah, and that's why, this is why I like you, Brian, way more than anybody else on this podcast. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. Not sorry. And with that, we shall say good night, farewell. And Brylan, where can you find more of your work?
You can find me being hateful on Twitter at Bryland, Brilund. You can also find me doing many reviews on Instagram at I am Bryland. And I'm the host of the Games Cast. It's at twitch.tv/Down and From Podcast. Every Thursday, we try to play some video games and talk about some random stuff that happens on the screen while I play them.
Nice. Abbott, where can you find more of your work?
I am out on the interwebs as the Abs Man, Theabbsman. The Googles will try to tell you you're actually looking for the Ass Man, but don't click on that. It's going to take you to all the wrong places.
Or click on it.
Unless you're looking for that sort of...
risky click.
Yep. I mean, we're talking about lots of butts later, so maybe that's what's to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also just recently... had my Blade of the Immortal review come out, so feel free to listen to that. That was the most recent one put up by the podcast. But otherwise, I'm out there doing beer boners.
All right. Blew It the Shredder. Where can you find more of your work?
Yo, what's happening, guys? You can find my work at My News Music or My News Band on most major social media platforms. We hopefully will have finally some new music out because we've been sitting on like 2 songs for the past year as the only thing we've released. So look forward to that. I'm sure we'll do something at some point with someone.
All right. And we can find us. We are the Down and Front Podcast. We are on iTunes. We are on Stitcher. We are on the Google Play Store. You can find us on YouTube. We're going to be on Twitter. So _DIFP. You're going to see a lot of polls, different like information. Like definitely tweet at us as much as possible. If there's something that you don't like about the show, you don't like agree with Brylan's points because he's probably wrong the majority of the time, tweet us and let us know. _DIFP. Sorry, Brylan, but it's true. We also have a Facebook that we do a bunch of different photos and posts as well. Facebook.com/DownandFrontPodcast. And we also have an email. So if you want to ask us questions or if you want to be a new follower and kind of find out exactly what's happening or something that's coming up that's a big, big jump for us this week, so we're super pumped about that, definitely check us out on email, downandfrontpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to help us keep going, if you want extra bonus materials as well as other kind of small things that we're doing, we have a Patreon. And just for the price of an Arizona iced tea, sweet tea version, because it's probably the best. Sorry. Maybe the green tea is good too. Who knows?
No,
Well,
Arnold Palmer's.
The strawberry pink lemonade one's also pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I like the really sweet ones, obviously. There you go.
I like the green tea.
The green tea one's good. Yeah, the green tea one's good.
Yeah.
Patreon.com/Down in Front Podcast. Sign up for a Patreon. You can donate as little up to just $1. You can donate as much as you like. That's awesome. Definitely kind of help us out because it's awesome to keep doing this stuff because we will be doing this as much as possible. And we are.
Or if I may add something, if you have a dungeon party like they do in Stranger Things, each person put in 20 cents. That makes $1.
Yeah. Or invite us, and I would love to play the dungeon because I've actually never played Dungeons and Dragons.
That's like Jesse Rand's email address, jesserandsdungeonparties.com. Also, I thought of this one. He hasn't done this one yet, but Jesse loves Barb forever, where the 4 is actually spelled out FOR at ymail.com.
Okay.
I want to go with Jesse's Cheeto fingers at ymail.com.
I like the Jesse Cheeto singers. We shall bid you farewell, bid you adieu. Stay tuned for our next review. I think we're actually going to be doing a couple, so kind of keep an eye out for that because we're looking to do The Punisher and Justice League. So stay tuned for that.
One of those is going to be better than the other.
Just Ass League. Bye.